Ian Locheed. Hi.
Hello, good afternoon everybody. I'm here to speak about the Provincial Council buildings, and I do acknowledge the City Council's investment in historic heritage, both publicly and privately owned. And I want this investment to continue, and in particular in relation to the Provincial Council buildings. It's the oldest building in our city. It's the oldest documented building certainly surviving in our city, and I'm not really here to talk about the Stone Council Chamber or the Bellamy's block, but the two timber wings along Durham Street and Armagh Street and their respective stone towers. I think it's extremely unfortunate that the funding for the restoration of that section of the buildings was withdrawn from the city plan, and I submitted on that a year ago. And I think we need to see the Provincial Council buildings in its wider context, not just in that of Christchurch. It is the city's earliest surviving building, but it's the oldest surviving building associated with representative parliamentary democracy in New Zealand. It's the fourth oldest after New South Wales, Tasmania and Victoria in Australasia, and of these it's the second oldest purpose-built parliamentary building in Australasia. It's internationally recognised as a significant example of the Gothic revival, and as a parliamentary complex, along with the Canadian Parliament building, it's the first of these internationally to follow the style of the Palace of Westminster in London, rebuilt between 1840 and 1865, the same year in which the Canterbury provincial buildings were completed. It's also the most significant secular design of Benjamin Mountfort, the architect who did most to establish the Gothic revival character of Victorian Christchurch. And councillors were probably not aware when funding for this provincial buildings was withdrawn from the city plan that 2025 will be this bicentennial of Mountfort's birth, something which I hope the city will celebrate and commemorate in a suitable way. And I think it's inconceivable that at that time the most significant building of Mountfort's should be sitting empty, mothballed and unrestored. Can you imagine London marking the 400th anniversary of Sir Christopher Wren's birth in 2032 without ensuring that his most significant buildings are properly cared for? The siting of the provincial buildings opposite the convention centre, currently under construction, is also, I think, very significant for the way in which the city is perceived. Do we want visitors to our convention centre looking across the river to buildings that are effectively abandoned? It would be so much better for the image of the city for conference delegates to witness the provincial buildings either restored or moving in that direction. Now, I realise the city received a global payment for its insurance, but there was 35 million of insurance cover identified for the provincial buildings, and the work that was contemplated in the last city plan.
24.9 million.
Yeah, well,
the insured value was 36.2, but the actual settlement amount, without the global settlement ratcheting it even further, was 24.9.
Which would be significant and sufficient to cover the cost of the restoration of the timber wings and the stone towers. In addition to that, of course, there's the 2.5 million from the Earthquake Fund and from the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, for the restoration of the stone towers. And it seems to me it's a wealthy council that can afford to forego funding at that level by not spending it on the project for which it's intended. The other point that I think is very important is that if work on the provincial buildings is deferred until 2029, the knowledge, experience and expertise of the engineers, heritage architects and heritage professionals who have decades of experience working on the buildings will effectively be lost to the project. They will all be retired by that point. It's going to simply add to the cost of the project when it's eventually undertaken. I don't see this as a project that the city needs to fund on its own. It should be aiming to partner with government to secure funding internationally for buildings that are of international significance. So I would urge you to return sufficient funding to the long-term plan to allow work to get underway on the timber sections and the stone towers on Armour Street and Durham Street.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Look, thank you very much, Ian. I don't have the numbers in front of me of how much that particular part of the project would cost, but I do have an estimated reinstatement cost for the whole facility of September 2015 without betterment, and that was 94.4 million.
Yeah, my understanding is that the QS estimate was in the vicinity of 20 to 25 million for the timber sections and the stone towers.
Right. So the entire insurance proceeds would only reinstate that.
Well, that would be a very good start, and it would be a way of leveraging the restoration funding for Bellamy's and ultimately the Stone Council Chamber.
Yeah.
I think without dealing with those timber sections, it's going to be much harder to approach the more difficult and complex part of the complex.
Yeah, I mean the challenging thing for the city is that it is actually a building of national significance, and that's
of international significance.
Well, yes, I know, but in terms of it was the regional building, it is the only provincial building left, and it's now down to the city, and it wasn't insured sufficiently. So.
Well, I shall be continuing my lobbying with central government.
I expect you to do that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.